piping of the Daemon Pipers is the mechanism by which reality is generated and sustained. The patterns in the sound, the rhythms, the intervals, the harmonics and dissonances are the templates upon which the laws of physics are modeled. When the music changes, the laws change. When the music degrades, the laws degrade. When the music ceases, the laws cease, and the dream collapses back into the undifferentiated chaos from which it was conjured. I have written of the throne, and of him who sits upon it. I have written of the piping, and of those who produce it. But I have not yet described the court itself, the space, if space it can be called, in which these things exist, and in which the eternal drama of the mindless cosmos is enacted. This I shall now attempt, though the attempt must fail. For the court of Azathoth exists in a condition that precedes the invention of space, and therefore cannot be faithfully rendered in the spatial language that is all we possess. Imagine, if you can, a darkness that is not the absence of light, but the absence of the possibility of light. Imagine a vastness that is not great distance, but the absence of the concept of distance. Imagine a place that is not a location, but the negation of location itself, a region defined not by what it contains, but by what it is incapable of containing, which is to say, order, structure, dimension, measurement, direction. This is the court of Azathoth. It is not a chamber, however large. It is not a void, however empty. It is the fundamental substrate of all possible spaces, the blank canvas upon which the geometry of the universe is drawn, and the canvas is alive, and the canvas is hungry, and the canvas is dreaming. The Panakitic manuscripts describe the court in a passage that I translate with some hesitation, for the original is in a script whose symbols do not correspond to any sound a human throat can produce, and my rendering is therefore interpretive rather than literal. Before the first angle was drawn and the first dimension conceived, there was the place that is not a place. It has no walls, for walls imply an inside and an outside. And it is both and neither. It has no floor, for a floor implies a surface, and it is deeper than surface, and shallower than depth. It is the womb of geometry, and geometry has not yet been born from it. And when geometry is born, it shall not diminish it, for it contains all possible geometries, and all impossible ones, and the space between them, which is also it. This is as near to a comprehensible description as any text I have encountered provides. What must be understood is that the court of Azathoth does not exist within the cosmos. It is not, as the naive might suppose, some distant region of outer space to which one might theoretically travel if one possessed a sufficiently swift vessel. It is not within the cosmos, because the cosmos is within it. The universe that we inhabit, with all its galaxies and stars and worlds and the inconceivable distances between them, is a tiny bubble of organized space floating in the infinite non-space of the court. In the same way that a soap bubble floats in the air and, like a soap bubble, it is spherical only because that shape requires the least energy to maintain, and it is transparent, and it is fragile, and the medium in which it floats is indifferent to its survival. I stated in the preceding chapter that the throne of the Daemon Sultan is located at the conceptual center of all that exists. Let me now clarify this with a precision that may, I fear, be more disturbing than the vagueness it replaces. The throne is not at the center of the cosmos. The cosmos has no center. It is finite but unbounded, curving back upon itself in dimensions that human mathematics has only recently begun to intuit. The throne is at the center of the court, and the court is everywhere that the cosmos is not, which is to say, the throne of Azathoth is on the other side of every wall. It is below every floor. It is beyond every star. It is at the bottom of every abyss. It is separated from us at every point and at every moment by nothing more than the thin membrane of ordered reality, and the membrane, as I have labored to explain, is thinner than we suppose, and growing thinner still. The entities I have called the other gods, those amorphous, colossal, and mindless beings who dance around the throne of Azathoth, require a more thorough treatment than I have yet given them, for they are the immediate context in which the Daemon Sultan exists, and without understanding them, one cannot fully grasp the nature of the cosmic order. They are called by many names. In the language of the Panachotic manuscripts, they are designated by an ideogram. That means, roughly, the first exhalations. In the tradition preserved by the priests Nasht and Kamen-Tha, the guardians of the Cavern of Flame in the Dreamlands, they are called the Deusses Supremos, the Supreme Gods, a title of terrible irony, for they are supreme in power, but utterly devoid of the awareness, intention, or purpose that one associates with divinity. Among certain debased cults of Central Asia, they are known simply as the Dancers. I find this last name the most apt, for their defining activity is their dance, and it is through the dance that they exert their terrible influence upon the fabric of reality. Let me be precise about what I mean when I say that they dance. The other gods do not dance as men dance, with rhythm, with intention, with the body moving in patterns shaped by music or ritual or joy. Their dance is the movement of pure chaos expressing itself in the medium of proto-matter. They writhe, they flail, they undulate, they extend pseudopodia of impossible length and retract them again. They merge with one another, 2 or 3 or 100 flowing together into a single colossal mass of seething protoplasm, and then separate again, each carrying with it random fragments of the others, so that no single entity among them retains a stable identity for more than a few moments of our time. They are individuality without individuals, a churning, separating, recombining mass of primal substance that possesses no more unity or purpose than the waves of an ocean. And yet each of them is larger than a galaxy, and yet each of them possesses more raw power than all the stars that have ever burned in the visible sky. And yet their dance, mindless though it is, exerts forces that shape the structure of reality at the most fundamental level. The so-called fundamental forces of physics, gravitation, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear interactions are not, as the scientists suppose, intrinsic properties of matter. They are the disturbances propagated through the fabric of space by the dancing of the other gods, in the same way that ripples are propagated through the surface of a pond by the thrashing of a large and mindless animal that has fallen in. This is a truth of the most profound and unsettling kind. It means that the physical laws by which our universe operates are not laws at all, but accidents, transient patterns in the chaos, maintained not by any logical necessity, but by the continued motion of entities that do not know we exist and would not care if they did. If one of the other gods were to cease its dancing, if its pseudopodia were to still, for even the briefest instant, the ripples it produces would be disrupted, and somewhere in the cosmos, on some world or in some region of space, the physical constants would shift, and everything built upon those constants would collapse. Stars would dim or flare, atoms would unbind, the very geometry of space would warp and fold, and the beings who dwelt in the affected region would not even have time to understand what had happened before they ceased to exist. To speak speak of a hierarchy among entities that possess no mind and no will may seem paradoxical. And yet, there is a hierarchy of sorts, not of authority, not of consciousness, but of proximity. The other gods are not uniformly distributed throughout the court. They are arranged, if arranged is not too purposeful a word, in concentric zones around the throne, and the character of each zone differs according to its distance from the nuclear chaos at the center. The innermost zone is the region closest to Azathoth's throne, and it is here that the other gods are at their most chaotic, their most formless, their most violent in their gyrations. The entities in this zone have been described by those few who have perceived them through vision, through ritual, or through the unhappy accident of being projected there by forces they did not understand as little more than a seething wall of undifferentiated substance, a tsunami of protoplasm, hundreds of light years thick, crashing perpetually against the throne, and being perpetually repelled by the sheer density of the Daemon Sultan's presence. Nothing that enters this zone retains its form. Matter is ground to its constituent particles, energy is dispersed. Information, the patterning that distinguishes one configuration of matter from another, is obliterated. The innermost zone is the region where the dream of Azathoth is thinnest, where the canvas of reality is stretched so taut over the abyss that it is very nearly transparent. And what lies beneath shows through in all its horror. The middle zone is somewhat less violent. Here the other gods move with a rhythm that, while still chaotic, possesses certain recurrent patterns, loops, and eddies in the general confusion that repeat themselves at intervals too vast for human measurement, but detectable to the instruments of the great race of Yith, who studied these matters with a clinical detachment that I, who am merely human, cannot help but envy. It is in this middle zone that the Daemon Pipers are situated, those entities whose function, insofar as function can be attributed to mindless things, is to produce the sound that maintains the dream. The outer zone merges gradually with what we would recognize as normal space, or rather, with the outermost edges of the cosmic bubble. It is here that the influence of the court manifests in ways that can be, with great effort and at great risk, perceived from within the dream. The denizens of the outer zone are the least formless of the other gods. They retain certain stable configurations for longer periods, and some of them, the very outermost, the least powerful, the most remote from the throne, have been observed to exhibit something that a generous observer might describe as behavior. They are drawn to the cracks and thin places in the fabric of reality. They press against the membrane. They seep, and it is through this seeping that the greater part of what mankind calls the supernatural enters the ordered world. I come now to the crux of this chapter, the Daemon Pipers, those entities upon whose ceaseless performance the continued existence of the cosmos depends. What follows is drawn from the Panachotic fragments, from certain passages in the Comorium cycle, from the testimony of dreamers and visionaries across the centuries, and from my own appalling experience in the depths beneath the nameless city. The Pipers are not a species. They are not a race, or a nation, or a category of being. They are a function, a role, performed by certain portions of the amorphous mass of the other gods, portions that have, through some process that defies analysis, become differentiated from the general chaos to the precise degree necessary to produce the piping. Imagine, if you will, that the churning ocean of proto-matter that constitutes the other gods has developed, here and there, specialized organs, not eyes, not ears, not limbs, but structures whose sole purpose is to vibrate at a particular frequency, to produce a particular resonance, to maintain a particular note in the cacophony of the void. These structures are the pipers. How many of them there are, no source agrees upon. The Panachotic manuscripts speak of the ninefold choir of the abyss, which suggests a small and defined number. The Liber Ivonis refers to 1,000 times 10,000 flautists, which suggests a host beyond counting. The De Vermis Mysteries of Ludwig Prynne describes them as innumerable, yet fewer than the stars, and each one vaster than the stars it numbers. I am inclined, from my own researches, to believe that the number is neither fixed nor meaningful, that the pipers emerge from the mass of the other gods and are reabsorbed into it in a constant flux, so that at any given moment there may be 9 or 9 million, and the distinction carries no significance. What is significant is the sound they produce. I have spoken of it as piping, and that is the word most commonly used in the texts. But it is a piping only, in the sense that the roar of a cataract is a whisper. It is the nearest analogy the human ear can supply for a phenomenon that exceeds the capacity of human audition by orders of magnitude beyond. Reckoning. The sound of the Daemon Pipers is not a sound in the physical sense. It is not a compression wave traveling through a medium, for in the non-space of the court there is no medium and no direction for a wave to travel. It is, rather, a modulation of the fundamental vibration of chaos itself, a shaping of the raw noise of the void into patterns that, while not melodic in any sense a musician would recognize, possess a structure sufficient to impose a kind of order upon the disorder that surrounds the throne. Let me state this in the plainest terms I can devise, for it is a point of the utmost importance. The piping of the Daemon Pipers is the mechanism by which reality is generated and sustained. The patterns in the sound, the rhythms, the intervals, the harmonics and dissonances are the templates upon which the laws of physics are modeled. The speed of light, the charge of the electron, the gravitational constant, the ratios that govern the strong and weak nuclear forces, all of these are expressions translated through layer upon layer of cosmic structure, of the original patterns in the Piper's music. When the music changes, the laws change. When the music degrades, the laws degrade. When the music ceases, the laws cease, and the dream collapses back into the undifferentiated chaos from which it was conjured. I have said that I heard the piping in the depths beneath the nameless city. I have spoken of it as a thin, monotonous sound, a single note sustained without variation. This was, I now understand, a deception of the senses, or rather, a limitation of them. The human ear, confronted with a complexity of sound that exceeds its capacity to process, reduces what it hears to the simplest possible interpretation, in the same way that the eye, confronted with a color outside the visible spectrum, perceives nothing, or perceives a dull gray that is the brain's translation of its own confusion. What I heard as a single note was, in reality, an orchestra of incalculable complexity. Millions of voices, if voices they may be called, each producing its own variation on the fundamental theme, each shifting and modulating in response to the movements of the others, the whole forming a web of interlocking rhythms so dense and so vast that the human mind could apprehend only its crudest outline. But there were moments, brief, terrifying moments, where my perception broke through to a deeper level, and I heard more. Not all, not even a fraction of all, but enough to understand that the simplicity I had been hearing was an illusion, and that behind the apparent monotony lay a complexity that made the greatest symphonies of human composition seem as crude and primitive as the tapping of an insect against a window pane. In those moments I heard harmonics, Not the harmonics of music as men understand it, but harmonics in the mathematical sense, overtones, undertones, resonances that multiplied and subdivided and interfered with one another in patterns that seemed to encode information, not messages, not language, not meaning in any intentional sense, but the raw data of the cosmos itself, the positions of every particle, the velocity of every wave, the state of every quantum interaction. All of it expressed simultaneously in a single unending chord of inconceivable complexity. I understood then what the pnakotic fragments meant when they described the piping as the voice of the dreamer, speaking the dream into being. The piping is not merely the accompaniment to reality, it is reality, expressed in its purest and most primal form, before it has been translated into matter and energy and space and time. I understood something else in those moments. Something that fills me with a dread I cannot adequately convey. I understood that the music is deteriorating. The patterns I heard were not clean and sharp as they must once have been. They were fuzzy at the edges, smeared, corrupted by noise, the random interference of the surrounding chaos bleeding into the signal. The harmonics that should have been crisp and distinct were blurred, their frequencies drifting, their amplitudes fluctuating in ways that suggested a system losing its coherence, a machine running down, an instrument going slowly and irreversibly out of tune. The universe is an instrument going out of tune. This is what I heard. This is the truth that underlies every other truth in this book. The piping is degrading. The patterns are dissolving. The dream is fraying at its edges, and the fraying is accelerating, and there is no one to repair it, because the Pipers do not know what they are doing, and the Daemon Sultan does not know that it is dreaming. And there is no one else. There is no one else in the entirety of the cosmos who possesses both the knowledge and the power to arrest the decay. The great race of Yith understood the problem, but they were historians, not engineers. They could observe the degradation and record it, but they could not reverse it. The Elder Things, in the days of their mastery, made certain attempts, the nature of which I shall describe in a later book, but they failed, and their failure contributed to their downfall. The Great Old Ones. But no, the Great Old Ones are part of the problem, not the solution. They're dreaming, they're stirring, their intermittent and terrible waking, all of these are symptoms of the decay, perturbations in the signal, intrusions of chaos into the ordered pattern of the dream.